Hi, I'm Taya Williams. Thank you for joining me here on Taya's Sweet Aroma. For today's recipe, I was a bit inspired by the weather outside. It is cold and it is snowing like crazy. And so I don't know about you, but for me, anytime that it is cold outside, I want something warm and comforting to eat. And nothing is more warm and comforting than a good hot bowl of soup. And so for the base of the soup, which I think a good base is necessary for any good soup because it's what will make or break your soup. So the recipe that I'm going to be sharing with you is the recipe for my homemade chicken stock. Now you will notice that these ingredients are pretty basic. And the reason I do that is because if I were to add a ton of different herbs or a ton of different seasonings to this stock, I wouldn't be able to use it in a lot of different dishes. And so say if I were making like a homemade enchilada sauce and I had rosemary in this stock, I wouldn't be able to use that stock because rosemary and enchilada sauce, they just don't go good. And so I like to keep the ingredients pretty basic for that reason. And that way, whatever dish I'm going to be adding it to, I can add all those other flavors to that particular dish and use the leftover stock to use it in multiple dishes. Like I could use it in rice or pasta or anywhere where it requires you to add in water. Use some stock. It will help to make your dish so much better, add that much more flavor. And anyhow, it's pretty easy to do. So I tell you, if you've never made any stock any homemade stock before, give this recipe a try and you will see that it's actually really easy and it comes in handy when you're getting ready to make something and you need some liquid or some type of broth to add to it, especially now around Thanksgiving when you're making a lot of different dishes, that this stock will just help to enhance them. So I hope that you give it a try, and so let's go over the ingredients. The ingredients that you're gonna need for this soup are a whole chicken, which I've removed the nice little packaging of giblets from the inside. You're also gonna need some celery, some carrots, some onion, which I've roughly chopped, some kosher salt, and also some bay leaves. And if you find that your bay leaves are a bit on the smaller side, just go ahead and add an extra smaller one in. Let's go on to the next step. To get started, all we're gonna do is now add all these ingredients to a pot of water. We're gonna start out with all the veggies, our bay leaves, and our salt. Now to the pot. The reason I like to do this last is because this chicken is gonna boil for a long time. And I like to add just enough water to come up around the chicken, and remember to put your breast up. The reason I like to have my breast up is because the breasts are what can dry out a lot easier than the rest of the meat. So if they're more above the water, what I find is that even though it's cooking for a long period of time, it allows the breast meat to stay nice and moist, and that way it doesn't dry out like it can tend to do when you're cooking it for a longer period of time. And so what I'm gonna do is get washed up, and we're gonna move this over to the stove, and then we're gonna bring it up to a boil, and I'll show you the next step. As I was washing my hands, I realized that I had my backbone sitting to the side. If you've watched my Cajun spatchcock chicken, you probably remember that I removed the backbone of that chicken and I froze it. Now is the time, and I know my mom is probably thinking, good girl, good girl. And so now is the time that you want to add those extra bones into your stock. If you were making a seafood stock, if you have extra shells left over from your shrimp, freeze them and then you can add them in. It just helps to enhance the broth or the stock that much more. So anyhow, I'm gonna get washed up again so we can move on to the next step. My stock has now come to a rolling boil. As you can see, the breasts are still a little bit above the water, and that's what I was talking about. You wanna make sure that you use a good sized stock pot so that way the breasts are not completely covered in the water, and it'll help them to stay moist during the cooking process. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna cover this with the lid. I'm gonna turn the heat down to a medium-low, and I'm gonna allow this to cook for an hour and a half, and I will show you the next step when we get there. My chicken was cooking for an hour and a half. When it was done cooking, I turned the heat off, removed it from the burner, and I also took the lid off and I allowed it to sit for at least 30 minutes. You want to allow it to sit before you start trying to handle it. And as you can see, you may think that the chicken is getting dry here because it's exposed to the air more. You don't have to worry about that. It still has that skin layer over it, so it's holding in all that good moisture onto the chicken breast. What I'm doing now is I'm skimming off some of the oil from the top for a soup that I'm going to be making. Now, when we strain this, I usually just store it away. I don't always take the fat off unless I'm using it right away. But if you would like, what you would want to do is strain it fully. You could store it in the fridge and the fats will kind of solidify on the top and it would be easier to remove some of the fats. You can do it that way if you'd like as well. That's usually if you're going to be cooking something the next day. I am getting ready to use it now, so I'm just going through getting off some of the oils. When I'm done doing this, I will show you the next step. I finished skimming off some of the fats from the top. I'm going to set this aside because I'm going to be using it in a little bit for some of the soup. I'll talk a little bit more about that process here in a second. What I'm going to do now is I am going to remove the chicken. Now, usually, I don't like for stuff to go to waste. So, usually for stock, some people may cook the chicken a lot longer and then just throw everything out. I want my chicken. I think the chicken tastes delicious, especially after it gets nice and tender in with all those juices from the vegetables and the onion. So that is why I only cook it for an hour and a half. And I think it still gives you a delicious stock to use in so many different dishes. So if I don't have to waste, I'm not going to waste. So as you can see, I've taken out the chicken. I'm going to set that aside. Now what we want to do is strain the broth out. And you want to be careful, make sure, because the broth is still a bit warm. So I'm going to take the pot and begin straining out all the vegetables and any of the chicken pieces from the broth. And as you can see, that chicken back is down there. It's cooked down nicely and worked its magic. Okay, so I'm gonna take these extra scraps. Now all this is going in the trash. They've done their job. The broth is flavored with the onions. It has the celery and carrot flavor, the bay leaf flavor. There's no need to keep any of these mushy vegetables at this stage. I'm gonna move this out the way so we can move on to the next step. Now that I have the stock nice and strained, you can see how rich and deep in color it is. And there's still some of the nice little oils still floating around on the top other than what I've removed from earlier. If you want to remove it completely, you can go ahead and place it into the fridge and allow it to solidify, and then it'll be easier to take it off of the top of the stock before you store it away. So what I'm doing now is I'm adding 2 cups of the stock to a freezer quart-sized bag. You want to make sure that you use a freezer bag because it will help to keep the stock from getting any kind of freezer burn taste. It can store in your freezer for up to 6 months. I'm going to remove all the air out of this bag. And what I do is once they cool down a bit more, I'm going to mark them with the date, and then I'm going to put them in the freezer flat like this, and that way they freeze up this way. Makes it a lot easier when I'm ready to thaw them and use them for later. Be sure to give this recipe a try. I think you'll really enjoy it. You'll see that it enhances the flavor of so many different dishes. It can be used in so many different ways. I mean, we got Thanksgiving coming up. You could add it to your gravy, and I mean, I'm telling you, this stuff is delicious. And anyhow, thank you for spending time with me today. And don't forget to like and subscribe below, as well as you can find the written recipe over on my blog at myinspiredaccounts.com. And I hope to see you again next time. Bye.